Welcome back to the In the Lead show. My name is Jennifer Tsang, and today I'm going to talk to Rachel Nelson and Kelly Palanti from the Kennedy Global HR Solutions organization. And we get to talk about psychological safety in the workplace and how that relates to DE&I. And it was a great conversation with Rachel and Kelly. And I am a firm believer that psychological safety is so important in all aspects of our life, but especially in the workplace where we see so much distress and uncertainty and things like narcissism and business results. And we're always trying to get to the next thing and drive, drive, drive. But we don't talk about how people are feeling, what people need, how to create a safe space so that people can bring their whole selves to work. We just want to kind of get to the outcome of having this really safe place, but we don't want to do the hard work. So it was a great conversation with Rachel and Kelly. And before we get started, I wanted to give you a little bit of background on both of these lovely young ladies. So Rachel Nelson is a CAHRI and an SHRM CP and VETS accredited human resources professional with approximately 25 years experience working in various industries in market segments, SME in senior management roles in organizations ranging from startups to large multinational corporations in both Australia and the United States. Rachel has significant exposure to all HR functions, including HR strategy, performance management, diversity and inclusion, cultural engagement, IRER, mediation, employee counseling, coaching, training course development and facilitation, policy development and implementation, organizational design, recruitment and selection, and assessment center facilitation through her roles as the director of Kennedy Global HR Solutions, director for Foresight Group, APAC, resource manager for Teltech International, and senior resource consultant for Fujitsu. Rachel has also developed and delivered training programs for the U.S. military, co-coordinated and run career fairs, and provided career coaching and advice, contributing to her being awarded the DOL Vets Hire Platinum Award in 2019 and 2020. Rachel is also an accredited mental health first aid officer. She is a SHRM Hawaii and Illinois member, a member of the Hawaiian Workforce Development Committee, and has published works in the Global Recruiter RCSA Journal and Recruiter International magazines. Rachel prides herself on delivering meaningful and effective advisory and consulting solutions that align with strategic objectives and add genuine value for her clients. She is passionate about her profession and is actively engaged in continued education, reading, and personal development. Now, I can definitely vouch for that. I mean, you'll hear how passionate Rachel is in our conversation on psychological safety, and she brings a lot of wealth and experience to this topic. So it was definitely a pleasure having her on the show. And Kelly is a senior SHRM certified HR professional and serves as a CEO of U.S. operations at Kennedy Global HR. With over 20 years successfully helping SMEs, startups, and non-for-profits transform their HR department, she now focuses on meeting the challenges of the 21st century workforce with solutions that include career development, DE&I, and mental health safety. Kelly has engaged leaders in one-on-one as well as group live and virtual sessions with topics such as leading with empathy and the DE&I impact on business growth. As a certified ISO psychological health and safety provider, she can develop new strategies for businesses to maintain and measure mental health safety. Kelly is mom to 3 young children and a self-described Gen X people first champion. KGHR Global is a woman-owned company that prioritizes leading with respect, empathy, and kindness, something we definitely need more of in this world. So for more information, visit their website at www.kennedyglobalhr.com or find them on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Like I mentioned, today is going to be a conversation all around psychological safety and how each of us, whether we are managers or executives, each of us as everyday leaders, how can we start to build more psychological safety into our everyday lives, which includes the workplace, and how we can be empowered to develop and cultivate that psychological safety every day and not wait for your executive team or for HR or for anyone else to give you that green light to start doing the things that is required for us to really build more inclusive, more collaborative, more truly productive teams by cultivating that psychological safety. Because I believe at the core of it, that is what's missing. And that's what is going to be the key to unlocking better communication, better collaboration, more inclusion, more safety so that people feel seen, people feel heard, people feel like they are empowered to bring their whole selves, including difficult days, difficult emotions, all of it, so that they feel safe to bring all of that to work and that we can all thrive together and build better workforces. So I hope you guys enjoy the show today and welcome to the show. Welcome back to the In the Lead show. My name is Jennifer Tsang, and I am joined today by Kelly Palanti and Rachel Nelson. And we are going to have a conversation today around psychological safety and DE&I. So thank you both for joining me.
Thanks
Welcome,
so much,
Jen.
Jennifer.
Yeah, and maybe we'll kick it off with you, Rachel, first. Why don't you tell the listeners who you are?
Thank you so much for having us on the show. And I guess, Jen, my background is about 25 years now in human resources and recruitment. My passion is really in the psychological safety space, mental health, helping organizations build from the startup and grow their team in a way that's culturally appropriate, and helping those companies engage with their clients in a way that maximizes both the employee and the employer relationship.
Great. Awesome. Thank you. And how about you, Kelly?
Hi, thanks, Jen. I am Kelly, and my name is Kelly Palanti. I'm the CEO of the U.S. operations for Kennedy Global HR, partners with Rachel here. Similarly, I also have 20 years experience in HR. I primarily work with helping small to mid-sized companies, startups, and non-for-profits really establish HR departments and work on a lot of the problems that we face in today's workforce. One of our focuses that been the last year has been on career development, DEI, and mental health. We work primarily with leaders to get these issues across. One of the things that we specialize in is the ISO psychological health and safety certification. And I think that, just like Rachel mentioned, this is something that's important that businesses are looking for and that really need to be successful in this environment.
Awesome. Well, it's lovely to meet both of you, and I'm excited about this conversation. So, maybe to kick things off, I mean, you mentioned that psychological safety is really, really important. And I know we hear that a lot, especially in corporate America. We talk about that a lot. But what does it mean? So, I'm curious, either of you that want to jump in, like, what does psychological safety mean?
I guess, Jen, for us, it means being in an environment where people are free to, well, they're free and they're comfortable to say, I made a mistake, or I disagree with that. I could be wrong. I have a concern, or I have an idea, or hey, I actually just don't know. Um, where they're free and they're comfortable to say that without fear of retaliation or any adverse action against them. So I guess that's the environment that we would say is a psychologically safe environment.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I always think of it as being able to bring my whole self. So being able
Yep.
to bring whoever I am, whatever I'm feeling, whatever I'm thinking to the workplace without the fear of maybe retaliation or judgment or shame. But I heard kind of fear and also whole self. I don't know how that lands with you guys, but that's what kind of came up for me as you were describing that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you say your whole self, I mean, we are human, we have humanistic characteristics, and we can't not bring those to the workplace. So, it's a psychologically safe workplace is to be able to bring your whole self and to know that that's okay to bring your whole self to work, whatever that looks like on that day.
Yeah.
I think on that day is important because we are ever changing beings and it could be changing on day to day. And I think that's one of the things that makes Rachel and I so successful is that, in the past, we have lived under that kind of that fear of being
Yeah.
that fear, honestly, of saying, hey, something's going on with the kids right now. I have to, reschedule this meeting. And kind of like coming up with an excuse, honestly, which is kind of stressful in itself, to feel like you can't be honest, for fear of, like you said, how you're going to be shamed later, how that reflects for you, even particularly things like in performance reviews, etc. Those are kind of things that actually can be brought up to people. So I think
Mhm.
just to be able to bring yourself to the workplace is so important. And Rachel and I, that's one thing we want to establish, for our company is really to role model this behavior that we're asking companies to lead inside their organizations, and really leading more with from a place of empathy.
Yeah, definitely. And like Kelly just said, both of us have experienced that fear mentality in the workplace. Not being comfortable or feeling okay enough to say, well, I disagree with that, or I challenge that, or, oh, my kids are sick. And not feeling valued for what you can contribute. So, definitely, when Kelly and I established the business, we wanted to make psychological safety a priority, and it's something that Kelly and I practice every day with each other. You know,
Mm.
I know I'm 100% comfortable saying to Kelly, "Oh, I don't really agree with that," or "What do you think about this?" or "I actually don't know the answer to that question. Do you know?" Um, and that's definitely the culture that we want our organization to have.
Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely hear it. It sounds like a passionate thing for both of you. And
Yeah.
I, and something that's also important. And I agree. And I love that I hear you guys practice it daily. And one of the questions that came up for me as you guys were talking was, okay, we all know how important it is. And even there's studies that have been done. We talk about it a lot. It's written into our culture and values, but it's harder to implement. So, what do you think gets in the way from people actually cultivating that psychological safety?
I
Oh,
really believe, like most change or most things that are going to be effective inside an organization come from leadership.
yeah.
And that starts with, if that's your board of directors, if that's your CEO, whoever leads that, they have to show that. And they have to show vulnerability when they're doing it. And
Mm,
only that way is it going to happen, because I see a lot of these things try to be implemented by HR at the middle management level to try to push it down. This is something we want to do to attract, for the employees. But a lot of the senior executives don't either participate or don't practice it themselves. And I think that is really important, and that they actively are behind it. They say, listen, we're going to go out and have somebody help us do this, and talk about it. Use the word psychological safety, make it more
mm,
mainstream, because the more you talk about it, the more you'll feel safe, approaching the subject in the workplace.
yeah, definitely agree with that, Kelly.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I'm also curious about So, we talked about a couple of things about what you kind of notice when there is psychological safety. And I'm curious, like,
Mhm.
what else, like, if you were going into an organization, you said to yourself, wow, there's a lot of psychological safety here. What would be some of the things that you'd be seeing and feeling being in that presence?
I think you would see the engagement from the employees. You would see thought generation. You would see the creation of ideas and concepts. Probably a very lateral way of operating. It's not such a hierarchical approach to it, but everyone being encouraged to generate ideas and thoughts and being encouraged to do that and valued for doing that as well. You probably see higher retention rates in that organization. Um,
Mhm.
back to sort of what Kelly was saying, it's very easy to write down that you value a person in your company values, or that you're passionate about a person or your employees, but it's very different to actually doing it and living it. So um, yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So, it sounds like maybe even like a feedback culture would be
Yeah.
important. I don't know why I also feel like when I try and picture psychological safety, what I see is kindness. I see a lot of people, like you said, collaborating, engaging, working together, but it just feels like maybe even like a lightness in the air. Like, because you know how you can sense like when things are really tense or,
Yeah.
there's a lot of stress in the environment. But I don't know why to me it just feels like it's just a kinder, kind of safer, you could just feel it
Yeah. And
in the
both Kelly
environment.
and I, in our careers, like I mentioned, have experienced that fear-based leadership, and it's a terrible, terrible way to um, run a company or run a brand. Um, so definitely leading with kindness is, oh,
It's
it's
it's it's
paramount.
part of our core. Yeah, we talk
Yeah,
about respect, empathy, and kindness. That's really, what we want to lead with. And that's what the kind of clientele we hope to attract. So when we put those three words on our branding, we're telling, people that we work with, this is what we prioritize. When we recruit people into our organization, they're going to see Rachel and I talking about these three things, so they know this is the company that actually lives what they're putting out there.
yeah. And for us to model that to our employees as well. So for them to see Kelly and I actually engaging in active collaboration and idea generation and positive disagreement on some topics, to get to the outcome that we're both happy with. I think that's how it needs to be modeled. That we both can communicate and run a company with empathy, with kindness, and with psychological safety.
Yeah. I almost feel like psychological safety is like a product of all of the practice and the work and the things that you're living every single day. It's not necessarily something you can just write down and then
Oh yeah,
immediately, see the value. It's almost like you need to put in the work and really do some of the hard things. Like you said, disagreeing productively is a big one. Having feedback, just
mhm,
general kindness. And I don't know, for me, I can be a little bit more sensitive. So I can always just sense, like when I walk into a room, oh, like you can feel the tension or it feels light, people are smiling, people are opening the doors for each other. You can just feel, right? Like that safety and how it's cultivated just by even looking around and just kind of observing.
And that's, of
mhm,
course, when you feel that lightness, that's the kind of place you want to be. You
Yeah.
want to be there. And there used to be a time when people didn't ever want to be at work. Work was a place that you wanted to escape from. You were there from 8 to 5, and then you left, and you hoped you didn't have to think about it after that. It's changing. It really is an integration of our life. We get so much out of it. And I think the pandemic has really shown us that number one, we need this. We need to prioritize this in workplaces. And two, people want it. They
Mm,
want it, and they are going to prioritize that when they look at a company over sometimes compensation. Because, as you know, how we feel every day affects so many things in our life, our health, how we advance in our careers, how we interact with everyone around us. So I really believe this is it's one of those things, like I think you mentioned, it's been talked about a long time. It's been on people's pages of like, yes, we believe this, we're going to do this. And what if one of those other positive things that comes out of COVID is this? Like, now is the time. We've got to
Mhm.
take it seriously.
mm,
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like we've almost crossed this point where we can't return, which I'm actually kind of excited about because it's almost
Mhm.
forced the conversation, right? And a
yeah,
lot of people are realizing, like, hey, like I deserve more. Feels just more empowering. Like people feel like, yeah, like maybe more people will make those decisions based on how does it feel, right? What kind of psychological safety are they practicing within the work versus, the dollars, the title, I think a lot of people are having kind of that mindset reset where it's like, yeah, things are changing and I want more out of life, right? Than just
Yep.
money
yeah,
and uh, yeah, it always feels like to me like it's about ego, and I feel like sometimes that's where kind of we go off the rails a little bit is when we're living too much in that ego where it's driven by money, titles, power.
Mhm.
Anytime there's silos in an
mm,
organization, you can definitely
Mhm.
sense that, wow. And I've seen it. I mean, I've actually seen it firsthand where people come into a team and they're like, wow, I can just sense like the silos that are happening. And then what does that do to psychological safety? I mean, it must just tear it right down.
and it's
Um,
also not productive for the organization either, because then they're not comfortable to share their ideas, or they're not bringing their whole self to work that day.
mhm.
um, I know Adam Grant talks about a culture of toxic positivity where
Yeah.
everyone's encouraged to be happy and everything's great, and
That's
everything's
not
not
life.
great. That's not life.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's okay to not have an okay day.
That's messy,
And you're not going to
right?
be your most productive and your whole self if, yeah, if you're not having an okay day. So
Yeah.
let's make it okay to say I'm not okay.
Yeah, and I think the more we do that, I think it becomes easier. But I think you're right with COVID, even how we're all forced to kind of either work where we live or live where we work.
Mhm.
There weren't a lot of boundaries, so you saw a lot of that, right? You
Yeah.
saw the kids, the animals, the chaos, and we all kind of just were kind of forced to kind of be more vulnerable and exposed in that way where it's like, hey, here's what's really going on behind the scenes, right? Like
Yeah.
this is what I'm dealing with. And that was
There's no
actually one of the
hiding. Right.
no. So that's one of kind of the bright spots I thought of the pandemic is if there was something chaotic going in the background, I'm like, it's totally fine. Like that's life. It's
Yep.
all good. Take a minute. I mean, but yeah, at work, sometimes I feel like we have to be like perfect. We have to look perfect, act perfect, say the right things. Where, yeah, in the pandemic, it was like, we ain't got time for that. We're just trying to
Yeah.
survive. Right. So, yeah,
Yeah.
I think that was a great, and this might be a good segue into DE and I. So, how do you feel like psychological safety impacts DE and I?
Well, I'm going to say they go hand in hand. You definitely really can't have one without the other, and definitely psychological safety promotes D&I. Because, like we just have said, a couple of times over, when you bring your authentic self, that's what diversity is. That's
Mm.
when you come to work as yourself. So they go hand in hand, and then of course, I really think they support women and minorities inside organizations. I feel like that's what psychological safety does. And
Mm.
when you allow those voices to, like we said, to be more collaborative, to be more innovative, that promotes diversity inside the organization. And just like we were talking about, like what's going to attract people to companies, this to me is a big attracting a tool, be like attractive tool, and a big going to be a competitive tool for companies to say, hey, we practice psychological safety here. I think that will really help them when they're doing DNI or DNI recruiting.
Yeah, I
Mm.
think any company that takes D&I seriously, they take mental health seriously as well. So, like Kelly said, it does go hand in hand. I really don't think you can have one without the other. If you're truly saying that you value diversity, equity, and inclusion, and psychological safety and mental health, I think that they're just so intertwined. It's definitely something that Kelly and I are so passionate about, and we're working with Equally Yours and developing talent on the gamification of D&I, that sort of gamification education with that. Um, so I really think it's something that companies need to really look at as, financial compensation is not going to give them a competitive edge anymore. It's just not. Things are different. I think during the pandemic, like you said, Jen, people saw what is going on in the background of people's lives. All the plates that people are spinning suddenly became very visible. Um, and we need to make sure that, our employees feel that it's okay if they drop a plate.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what was coming up for me as you were talking is DE and I, as well as psychological self safety, as well as mental health in general,
Mm,
reminds me of at the core, I believe people just want to belong. And I know that belonging is a very, it's kind of another buzzword that's used a lot, but when you think about it, it's a fundamental human need that we all
mm,
have to want to belong. And now, again, that's different than fitting in, right? We're not
yeah.
changing ourselves to fit in with whatever culture is there, but it's almost like the culture is shaped by us. And when we belong, we can bring our whole selves to work. That culture can look a lot different than maybe even what we wrote down on our value statement, but it's almost like something
Mhm,
that feels like it's evolving, like you said, because every day we come with something different and people are coming in and out of the organization. So it almost feels like it's a living, breathing thing, but it feels like at the core, it's that sense of belonging that people come into
mm,
work and they feel like, okay, I belong here. I don't feel like left out or like I don't fit in some way, but
mhm,
we all just belong and we're all a part of the same thing. Does that
mm.
make sense?
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, here in Australia, it's actually forming part of workplace health and safety legislation. So,
Mm.
just as organisations need to have risk management plans for physical hazards, they now have to have risk management plans for psychological hazards in the workplace. And the fines and the penalties for impacts to employees,
Mhm.
for those employers that are not aware and managing psychological safety risks in the workplace are right up there, if not the same as the fines and penalties, including jail time, for physical hazards. So it's a
Wow.
very, very important discussion that needs to be had.
Yeah.
So the certification I mentioned that we have is the ISO, and that is, the International Organization Standard. And so they have this new psychological safety standard underneath occupational health. So they've recognized, like, listen, this is a part of OC health. This is something that you have to look at as just like physical health now, and you
Yeah.
should be held to the same standards. But yeah, when you think about all the mental health challenges that we normally have dealt with in the workplace, and now with the pandemic on top of it, the challenges that go with remote and all of our new ways of working, it's just really, it's so paramount right now to make it a priority.
Yeah, and it sounds like you're putting your money where your mouth is too, so to speak, because you're actually you're being it. It feels like more to me if you're putting that kind of regulation and scrutiny on something, it sends a signal to people like, "Hey, this is important." Versus, a lot of times we just kind of say it on, a piece of paper and just say, "Oh, here's something that
Yeah.
means something to us," but we're really not living it, breathing it, and sometimes holding people accountable to how they're treating one another and how important that is.
Yeah,
So that's good to hear. I'll pray
exactly.
one day we have something similar in the US, but I don't know. Um, but
Ke- Kelly and
but
I have just done the ISO certification,
mhm,
and I undertook the course to become a mental health first aid officer. So, for us, it's not just something written on our value statement, that we value people or we're passionate for our employees. We're doing it, we're living it, we're breathing it. I've come to Kelly and said, I just can't work today. I just can't.
mhm,
And I can tell her why. I know I can be my authentic self completely with Kelly. And that's, as we said, that's how we want all of our employees to operate. We don't want
mhm,
someone coming into work if, they've just had one of the worst days of their life. We don't want that.
mhm.
We want to be able to um, really partner with our employees and letting them know that we value them as people, not just as contributors to our organization.
I
Yeah.
think what you just said, though, Jen, really highlights the value of diversity, even with us. So, we're both women, we're both moms, we're both HR professionals. We have a lot of similarities, but obviously one of our big, differences is we live in different countries, and so, like we just mentioned, they have mental health officers. That's an advantage for us to bring to employers here to the U.S. I
Mhm.
really do believe that. And this is something that I've practiced really state to state. As you know, certain states have a little more conservative, more laws, and others really have more laws that are more, progressive and help along a lot of these D&I efforts. And so a lot of times you can take those and replicate those, even though it's not mandatory for you. So I kind of look at this on that bigger scale. It's like, even though we're not required to do that here, let's look at what Australia is doing. That's part of diversity, right? Is that we're getting this other perspective, that this other viewpoint that we would normally not have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess
Yeah.
that's such a point of difference for us as an organization, because we do have that global overview. So we are looking at it from a global perspective and what's happening around the world in this space.
That's awesome. No, that's really awesome. And one of the things that popped into my mind while you guys were talking, because I'm just so curious your thoughts, was let's say within an organization, there's a really toxic narcissist on the team that you can. I mean, everyone knows, right, when they see that person, right, where you're like, oh gosh, like, and obviously for obvious reasons that completely erodes psychological safety. What are
Mm,
some things you think an organization or maybe a leader could do if they do have a report that is just really toxic and negative and narcissistic? What are some things you think that manager can do to help not only hold again people accountable so that so someone who's you know being very power hungry and asserting their ego, like what are some things they can do to kind of hold those people accountable to that culture and that idea of psychological safety?
This one is kind of difficult to kind of say offhand. It's one of those ones I hate to to brush it off like it's so, particular to the situation in person, but the
mm,
leader who is going to be doing this act, who basically is going to be dealing with this person, what we would need to know is, where are they at? What is their skill set?
mm.
Mm,
And like inside the organization, because that manager can't confidently hold up the skill set to do so. And then again, they're not backed up by leadership and executives to do that as well. If they have all those components, if they have the skill set, if they have the support from leadership, then they have to hold this person to the fire for sure. I would say it has to. There is no way around it, or else again you're eroding the whole company. And one person, as you know, can make the entire environment feel safe. I know
Mhm.
as an HR person, you've probably seen it as yourself, but one person can make 10 people leave a company, 10
Oh, yeah.
great people leave a company,
Oh, yeah.
which is sometimes heartbreaking as an HR person because you just want to like reach your hands out to them and say, I want it. And a lot of times it's because your hands are tied. You can't change because you don't have the support from leadership to make the
Yeah.
change. And so
Yeah.
it's not an easy answer.
I know it isn't an easy answer. Maybe it was a bit of a curveball just because I have some thoughts rolling in my head of
So
my
I'm
own
like,
experiences. But what I heard in that though is also it takes a lot of courage
Mm.
to build that psychological safety because sometimes it's not easy, right? Like I have a really great example of recently something happened in my workplace where we were holding a really large meeting and some people were saying things that were inappropriate and negative. And one of the senior executives was like, "No, like I see you on the little chat and I see what you're posting, like that is not acceptable." And said it out loud in front of everybody. And sometimes I feel like that's missing. Like I feel like we all want to be so nice to each other and we just want to maybe that goes into the toxic positivity you were talking about earlier, but it's just we all want to be so like, "Oh, well, it's okay. We'll just really try and bring them along." Well, sometimes I feel like you need to be like, "No. Like that is not
yeah,
acceptable." And
yeah.
people need to see that because otherwise they just feel like, "Oh, they're just gonna do whatever they want. They're gonna say whatever they want, and nothing's ever gonna happen." Like, sometimes I feel like you
Honestly,
need that courage.
yeah. As you know, Jen, D&I is not a new topic. It's an old topic. We've been talking about this for 20 to 25 years, and I feel like that kind of nicey nice approach has not worked. And that's really what's been happened. They've tried to use policy. They've tried to say, okay, we're going to get training and do this. And then there's no follow up. There's no measurement. It's like it's a lot of talk and not a lot of walk, I feel
Mhm.
like,
Yeah,
honestly.
yeah,
Um,
and it's because it's hard, right? Sometimes it's hard to really be that person to stand up and put a stake in the sand, say, "No." Like, it
yeah.
almost reminds me of parenting sometimes, right? It's like
Mm.
you have to sometimes be tough. Sometimes, maybe you're a little bit more lenient and you have more positive conversations, but sometimes you can't just let your kids stay up all night and go, "Okay, well, honey, we'll talk about that." I mean, no, you got to go to bed. Like, I mean, sometimes I feel like that's just what's needed. And I personally just wish I would see more of that. That adds at least to my psychological safety, feeling like there's some accountability for how we
Mm.
act.
And I guess
Um,
that's the position that Kelly and I have come from as well, going back to that fear leadership. And when you have said, you know, how you spoke to me, that wasn't acceptable, or how you spoke to me, or how you treated me in this situation, made me feel uncomfortable. And when that's not acknowledged, then at
mhm,
the end of the day, you're going to lose great people. So
yeah,
it's to your your detriment. And Kelly and I both have left organizations where that has happened. And that's why I guess our background has made us so passionate about driving this conversation.
yeah,
I
that's
would
awesome.
say, Jen, what I would advise leaders to do is just if you can let people know that you lead with good intention. That
Yeah.
is,
Mm,
I think, a big key thing. So if you do say something that might be considered, everyone's going to construe things. Some people like to be very talked to, very straightforward to. Some people like a side approach. But if you know that the person who's speaking to you is coming from you from a good place, that these are their values, it's received a lot differently.
yeah, yeah, that's true. That's a good reminder too, because it's not always a one size fits all approach.
Mm.
Everybody's different. And that's again the great thing about kind of building that psychological safety and us bringing ourselves is that we're all different, and that's the beauty of it. But it can be trickier to kind of
Mm.
manage people more individually and having more of that personalized kind of experience with somebody versus just having blanket, you know, policies or, value statements that just don't
Mhm.
seem as effective to me. No, it's great. So, what are some of the things you guys would recommend organizations and teams do to start building psychological safety?
Have the conversations, be open in having those conversations. Like Kelly said, we can offer the mental health first aid officer program, looking at psychological risk management plans, you know, actively showing that psychological safety is important to you as an organization.
I
Yeah.
would say that is big. It seems simple just to start using the word psychological
Mm,
safety and bringing them up in meetings and team meetings. Even if you're putting up a slide and saying this is psychological safety, this is the definition. We need to
mm,
start sometimes with the basics, like what is it? What is the exact definition? What do we mean by that? I talked to Rachel a lot that, and in the US here, we talk mainly about mental health. We're just now, I feel like, breaking into the space where psychological safety is becoming a term that we even use in our everyday speech here. And the reason why I really like the transition from one to the other is mental health often focuses on the individual, and it focuses on like EAP plans and really helping to
mm.
support a person. And while that is definitely part of it, a psychological safety plan, it is just part of it.
Yeah.
It is just one component. And I feel like sometimes, again, companies feel like they say, well, we have mental health counselors, we've got this 1-800 line, we did our thing, check.
Yeah.
We did mental health, we've got that off the list. And that's just really one component.
Yeah.
Mm,
And here in Australia, that's just not going to cut it anymore.
mm,
We need to have those risk management plans done. We need to have these conversations being actively had in the workplace and modeled as well. So, you know, that's why I'm so excited to talk to you today, Jen, because it's getting the word out there how important this is. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I can definitely tell it's important for both of you, and that's
Yeah.
really awesome. And I couldn't agree more that I feel like there is that shift happening. It feels like it's shifting from not only just kind of the individualized kind of approach to more of the collective, right? And knowing
Yeah.
that we are all a part of this team, organization, company, we're all in it together, and we all need to
Mm,
operate too together in a way that leaves us more whole. I almost feel like we need to have both operating really, really well. And I love how you said it feels like a check mark because that's how I always refer to it. It feels like, oh, this is what we're supposed to do. Check, we're
Yeah.
done. Or maybe we'll do a
Did
few things,
that,
but
yeah.
yeah, I
Hmm.
just feel because I don't know. I mean, my personal opinion is it just feels like it's really hard for people to like talk about feelings and be vulnerable. And the more that we can remove that stigma and the more of us, even just in a day to day capacity, start showing that vulnerability, I feel like it gives other people the safety to step into their own vulnerability. And I
mm,
think those are things that like individuals can do on a daily basis when they say, how can I impact psychological safety? You don't have to wait for your leadership or the CEO to come out with some kind of a plan. Start living it every day. Start being vulnerable yourself and supporting your peers and those around you and start building it. Cause I almost feel like it's like a top down and a bottom up approach. Like we need this intersection between the two where we're doing a lot of the good stuff from the top and they're being accountable and really setting the tone. But what can we do also as everyday people to help kind of elevate that psychological safety and provide it for one another?
Mhm. Definitely agree. Like you said, it's a collective, so that relies on each individual to do their parts. And so the more they can support someone and then let somebody know how they supported someone, that's right there is creating psychological safety, saying, I did this for someone else, and then someone might say, oh, I could do that, or I could do something similar. I didn't know it was
Mm,
okay to give that kind of help. I didn't know it was okay to reach out, in that kind of way. So it's almost just like, as we've talked a lot of times, too, storytelling, sharing
Mm.
how you can help others and things you do to help others.
Yeah. I feel like we're all in this together. Again, COVID really brought that front and center, right? Like we're all in it
Mhm.
together. We impact each other, and even small things you do every day can make an impact.
Mm.
And yeah. So we're winding down in the time, but I wanted to give each of you the floor for any closing thoughts or remarks on the topic of psychological safety. So, Rachel, I don't know if you want to go first and
Yeah, sure, sure. I guess, you mentioned, Jen, about being vulnerable and talking about feelings, but it's also important to talk about psychological safety in the fact of how it benefits the organization in that idea generation and people feeling comfortable enough to share their thoughts, their ideas, their concepts with each other. Um, I think it was Google who ran an experiment looking at what made different teams successful, and they came across that some of the most successful teams were the teams that really had that encouragement of thought generation and ideas and creativity. So not just recognizing psychological safety in the sense that people's emotions and what the where they're at on that particular day, but also encouraging that fearless organization, as Amy Edmondson puts it, to create that fearless organization where you can come and you can be, what do you think about this? How does this work? I'm not
Mhm.
sure about this. What do you think about this? So it's a really positive area of the workplace that, you know, um, let's look at it as a positive for organizations and employees as a
Yeah,
whole. Um,
yeah,
so definitely, I would encourage organizations to look at perhaps engaging a mental health first aid officer or doing psychological risk um, safety management plans, and being at the forefront but having that competitive edge, especially in the US, where we're talking about this. So it's such an exciting space, and it's only going to the conversation's only going to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
yeah, I would agree. And, one thing I heard in all of that that was a great reminder to me is I heard also in there curiosity and how important having kind of a curiosity mindset helps all of this. Because if we can be curious and we can be open, then things like innovation can live,
Yeah.
right? Things like feedback, things like vulnerability, things like empowerment and confidence. I mean, all of these things for me just feel very rooted. What I was hearing from you is like having that curiosity and
Mhm.
that fearlessness around curiosity and how important that is. So you're right. It's more than just mental health and, um, those things. I think it's actually a pretty broad topic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
How
would
about
just
with you?
play back to something that you both said actually earlier when you mentioned silos, Jen, and then Rachel mentioned the lateral approach, and I think that's really what's going to be key change in organization. The corporate world has been typically very masculine, and that's why a lot of these things. That's why we don't. I hate to say we don't talk about emotions, right? Because we put on this face of strength, of impenetrability, of resilience. Nothing harms us, nothing changes. Of course, we're expected to be there no matter what is going on in the background. You used to hear a lot of times you leave your home life at the door when you walk in the front door, which I used to think was like so interesting. Like, how do you do that? You just take your,
Yeah.
how does that work? But that was the mindset, right? Is that you leave everything at home, and you just when you come to work now your work self, and I think that is one of the key changes that's going to happen here post pandemic, is that we are going to change that structure. We're going to change the way we collaborate collaborate, because we can see that this need for psychological safety is, I said we just can't, stress it enough, during this environment. We've all gone through so many changes. And actually was speaking about what you said about, things coming into the background and all of our life coming in. If you recall, like one of the early viral videos was, I
Yeah.
think it was a newscaster, his little
Yeah.
one like ran in
Yeah.
and the wife came and pulled him out. That was a great moment. He got that
Yeah.
he that was wonderful, and that was unscripted. That was real life. That wasn't perfect. And I
Mhm.
think that to me is like a capsule of an example of what good psychological safety is.
Yeah.
He was his whole true self there, and it turned out to be a positive thing. People connected with him. They looked at him and said, "That's me. That's
Mhm.
what I'm like." And
Yeah.
I think we're going to see a lot more of that vulnerability out there.
Yeah, I look forward to it. And as you were saying that about, how do I leave part of me at home? I was thinking back to Susan David, who's an emotions researcher, talks about how it's like asking someone to cut off their arm and leave it at
Hmm.
home and only come in with your left arm. I mean, how can you do that and then ask everybody, "Hey, let's all be vulnerable or let's bring our whole selves." Well, I've
Right.
left some part of my body at home. Like how can I can't be a whole person, but you're right. And I think it gets uncomfortable, but another great thing I think that came out of the pandemic was that we were kind of forced to kind of be in this situation where we had to be vulnerable. There was not a lot of other options. So
No options, right?
I think it was a really good thing. Well, I appreciate both of you, Rachel and Kelly. Thank you so much for joining the show today and talking about psychological safety and learning more about both of you. So thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much,
Thank you so
Jen.
much, Jen.
And if anybody wants to learn more about us and psychological safety and mental health officers, you can find us on our website, Kennedy Global HR, and then of course on the socials. Thanks so
Awesome.
much.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Jen.